Safety Webinar. At the end of the presentation, we will provide call-in information so that you may call in with questions. I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Peter Rogoff, the Administrator of the Federal Transit Administration. Thank you, sir. You may begin.
Well, thank you, and hello, everybody. This is Peter Rogoff, the FTA Administrator, speaking to you from Washington, D.C. I want to welcome you all to our overview of our new MAP 21 safety requirements at the Federal Transit Administration. This is a first in a series of webinars that we'll be doing on the progress we're making on implementing Section 5329 of MAP 21, our new core safety authorities. Today's webinar will not only provide an overview of these new authorities, it will give you an opportunity to learn what you should expect to be hearing from FTA headquarters in the future, what FTA will be expecting of our states and our grantees as part of this effort, and very importantly, we're also going to be seeking your input regarding how to proceed. It is really our goal as part of this initiative to maximize stakeholder engagement, and this webinar is one of those opportunities. So we have left a good bit of time at the end of this presentation to allow for folks to call in with questions and share their ideas. We'll do it in a radio call-in type format. So we hope that you'll join us for a robust discussion at that time. Let me also say that as FTA continues to roll out this new safety responsibility, there'll be a number of documents that will be published in the Federal Register that will be subject to notice and comment from the public. And I want to strongly encourage all stakeholders as part of this initiative to take notice and comment on those documents. We really are only going to do this successfully and enhance safety in public transportation and do it in a manner that really adds value without adding a great deal of cost if we have the input of the professionals in the field. So we really want your participation. I'm going to plow into some of the slides that will be before you and explain a little of the history of how we got here. As many of you know, there were a number of transit accidents in the summer of 2009, most notably the Washington Metro crash at Fort Totten that killed 9 individuals. But even before that crash, we were focused here at the FTA with concern over incidents that had happened on the T in Boston, on the SFMTA in San Francisco, fires and incidents on the CTA in Chicago, and we knew we had to take some action. The Washington Metro crash really catalyzed a lot of our thinking, and it resulted in us recognizing as a department under the leadership of Secretary LaHood that we needed to address the fact that the statutes prohibited the FTA from issuing even the most common sense safety standards of any kind since 1964. We really didn't feel that that status quo was acceptable when you consider the fact that we have robust FRA oversight for commuter railroads and Amtrak. At the same time, the non-regulated universe carries 8 times as many passengers as the commuter railroads and Amtrak on any given day. We have very robust FAA safety oversight for aviation, but the non-regulated transit universe actually covers 6 times as many passengers on a given day as do the airlines. So beginning in December of 2009, President Obama transmitted a new transit safety bill to Congress. It was formally transmitted to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. It was, in fact, the first time any President of the United States had transmitted legislation to the Congress solely about public transportation. At the same time that Secretary LaHood and I testified before Congress regarding that legislative proposal, Secretary LaHood also established a formal Transit Rail Advisory Committee for Safety, or TRACS. Like I said, that was done more than 2 years ago in December of 2009. He set up the advisory committee at that time made up of stakeholders from the safety community, from state safety oversight, from transit agencies, from impacted employee unions, really in order to give us a running start. So when Congress did give us Transit Safety Authority, we would have some important accomplishments and important ideas under our belt as we launch that new safety authority. And I think it's been a very, very successful effort. When President Obama did sign MAP 21 this past July, it did contain new safety authority for the FTA. It was not identical in every respect to what the administration initially requested. However, there were a great many similarities, and it really did signal a new milestone in transit safety oversight at the federal level. For the first time, we will be able to establish common sense safety standards for transit. And as I said before, our real focus is on providing improved safety in a mode of transportation that already is very safe. And I think that's something we all need to remember. We are not stepping in here to a situation where there are huge vulnerabilities every day on every line. We need to recognize that on any given day it is infinitely safer for a passenger to be on transit than on the highway. What we want to do is establish a process that adds value without adding a great deal of cost that will ensure that a safe mode remains safe long into the future, especially as equipment ages, as the more experienced employees rotate out of service, and to bring the most modern scientific methodologies for improving safety to bear on public transportation systems. We've established a new office within the FTA to do this work. It is our new Office of Transit Safety and Oversight. It is currently overseen by an Acting Associate Administrator, Vincent Valdes. With that, I want to thank you for your participation, and I'm going to let Vince Valdes take over the presentation from here.
Before Vince gets started, this is Paul Griffo. I am with the Safety Office of FTA. I just wanted to let you know that the information to participate in the call-in later on in this broadcast is displayed on your screen right now. As we go through the presentation, if you have questions and you want to call in after the presentation is finished, we will engage in a discussion over the phone. So we look forward to your participation in that. I just want to say that please, when you call in, limit your discussion, your comments or your questions to the safety provisions of the law, of MAP 21. This is primarily for industry stakeholders, for FTA grantees, state DOTs, state safety oversight agencies, transit unions, and vehicle manufacturers, people who have a stake in the new law. If you are a member of the public, we welcome your discussion, but please, again, limit it to the safety provisions of MAP 21. With that, I will turn it over to Vince.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. As our administrator just mentioned, this is a great opportunity to begin what is going to be an ongoing dialogue with our stakeholders and partners on the critical topic of transit safety. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about, first, the approach that FTA is taking on safety program implementation. Secondly, I'd like to brief you a little bit on what tools MAP 21 really gives the FTA in terms of new authority. And most importantly, I'd like to invite you to ask questions on this very important topic. So do please, I encourage you to participate actively. The first thing I'd like to address is the important underlying premise of MAP 21. MAP 21 gives us the opportunity to incorporate the principles of safety management systems, or SMS, into how we do business to improve safety within the transit industry. And that's for all of us. That's across the board. There are a lot of descriptions of SMS out there, some more academic than others, but basically SMS boils down to four basic principles. Essentially, they are establishing a comprehensive safety policy within an organization, developing safety risk management systems and tools, practicing safety assurance and monitoring, and doing everything possible from an organizational standpoint to promote safety with a capital S. Essentially, SMS is a way of identifying risk and developing mitigations for it. That's it. The real beauty, the real elegance of SMS is that it's scalable. It can be very simple for small agencies, or it can be very elaborate if your agency is large and complex. Now, I know that SMS is not a new concept for many in the rail transit industry. The industry has a long history with safety planning, and some agencies have implemented management practices that focus on an organizational safety culture. What MAP 21 does is help the entire industry take advantage of those best practices used by some. An advantage of SMS is that it encourages and facilitates strong communications between all stakeholders responsible for promoting safety, because it's really about information. If you can answer 4 basic questions, that is, what's the likely cause of your next incident? How do you know that? What are you doing about it? And is it working? Then you're practicing SMS. Now, as I mentioned earlier, both SMS and MAP 21 recognize that one size doesn't fit all. When you consider the diversity of the transit industry and systems across our country, and between transit modes themselves, SMS begins to make even more sense. Our implementation approach is going to reflect this. We want to take advantage of all of the best aspects of SMS. We understand that safety risks are not going to be the same from one transit agency to the next. We also understand that we want to take a fresh approach to transit safety regulation. It's the 21st century, and we want to approach this in a 21st century way, which is to say we want to encourage and build a culture that uses data and information to directly address hazards and risks. Let me take a few moments here to dive a little bit deeper into the major MAP 21 safety program elements. As I said, SMS is really reflected within MAP 21, and the way it's manifested is through some of these elements. MAP 21 lays out a number of major elements that define the mechanisms and interactions between the industry and FTA. Some of these are brand new requirements and represent as much of a change for FTA as they do for the industry. The first major element I want to bring to your attention is the National Public Transportation Safety Plan. MAP 21 stipulates FTA develop and implement a national plan, an umbrella, if you will, that establishes safety performance criteria for all modes of public transportation, that uses a definition of the state of good repair, which is something FTA has been working on and is working on actively as we speak, and that establishes minimum safety performance standards for public transportation vehicles used in revenue service. Again, the safety plan should be seen as a national framework, a way of establishing common, transparent expectations. To complement the national plan, MAP 21 requires all recipients of FTA funds, including states, to certify that they've developed a comprehensive agency-level plan that includes, at a minimum, performance targets, strategies for identifying and mitigating risk, and that shows that staff are adequately trained and have the appropriate authority in terms of lines of reporting within their organization. Think of it as a way of embedding safety in how every transit partner and transit-related agency conducts its business. MAP 21 also explicitly calls out a public transportation safety certification training program. What this program is meant to do is establish a baseline, a surety, if you will, that ensures that qualifications and training of safety oversight personnel are consistent and verifiable across the country. In support of this program, MAP 21 allows FTA grant recipients to use up to 0.5% of their formula funds for up to 80% of the costs of participation in the safety certification program. Now, another important feature of MAP 21 that I particularly want to bring your attention to is the State Safety Oversight Program and what that means now. The law now revises the requirement for state safety oversight programs for states that have fixed guideway systems within their jurisdiction. Mind you, these are systems that are not subject to FRA regulations. Systems of this type include heavy rail, light rail, cable cars, inclined planes, the whole gamut. The legislation calls for states to assume responsibility for safety oversight of these systems and enforce relevant federal and state laws for rail transit safety. States are also required to establish an SSOA with appropriate staffing. Keep in mind that the staff will be required to complete safety certification training developed by the FTA. Another important thing I want to bring to your attention is that MAP 21 specifically prohibits public transportation agencies from providing funds to the SSOAs that oversee them. Now, I had mentioned before that MAP 21 is as much a game changer for the FTA as it is for other stakeholders who are responsible for transit safety. From FTA's standpoint, our new responsibilities are going to include working much more closely with SSOAs to evaluate and improve their programs, issuing regulations that are responsive to the needs of a safety mandate but not overly burdensome, and reflective of the importance of all of our work, reporting on an annual basis to Congress as to the status of public transportation safety. That's the level of profile. That's how important our work is, that we will be reporting regularly to Congress on our status. Clearly, MAP 21 gives the FTA a whole new set of tools. We now have the authority to conduct oversight and enforcement generally, work with states to ensure the effectiveness of safety oversight programs, and issue reports and directives on public transportation safety, amongst other new responsibilities. We also now have the ability to participate as a full partner in accident and incident investigations. This is obviously a very important area for us, and one that we're doing a lot of thinking on as we speak. Again, it's part of the mechanics of setting up our internal office. At this point, you're probably asking, where is the FTA now? Well, although we're still waiting for full-year funding to implement MAP 21, we've been making real progress. First of all, we're in the final steps, as Peter had mentioned, of developing an operational FTA safety office with all that entails. And if you know the federal government, that's not a small task. We've been working very closely with TRACS, our industry rail safety advisory group, meeting with them first in September to begin MAP 21 discussions, and establishing 2 working groups around the very important topics of the National Safety Plan and the Agency Safety Plan. Additionally, earlier this month, our administrator sent a Dear Colleague letter to the states to clarify the actions that they should take to establish and finance their SSOAs under MAP 21. In terms of our next steps, we've been working on a number of concurrent rulemakings around the SSOA program, the requirements for the national and agency safety plans, as well as training certification. We're also developing a notice of availability and formula for making SSOA funds available as soon as possible. And we're producing a national outreach plan to engage our partners more fully. On that front, as I mentioned earlier, this is the first of what is going to be a series of webinars on the safety topic that we hope you'll all continue to engage in. This is all evolving very quickly. So how can you keep up with our progress, and how can you contribute to the new program? First of all, I encourage you to visit the FTA MAP 21 website, which includes links to program fact sheets. I encourage you also to sign up for MAP 21 email alerts from our website. You can also keep apprised of our work with our advisory committee by contacting us or TRACS directly. And by the time we have to write our first report to Congress 3 years from now, I'm sure we're going to have a very mature and effective safety program in place that meets the requirements of MAP 21, but that also reflects the safety needs of the transit industry. Thanks very much, and I encourage you all to engage in our process here and ask questions. And we're now opening it up to questions.
Okay, we're opening up the line now, so please call in. We're not just looking for questions, but we're also looking for your thoughts and your comments as well. So please feel free to call in. So while you're doing that, we will take a question from the Q&A that's been submitted online here. Okay, so someone's asking for a regulatory timeline showing the significant tasks, when they're due, and when an NPRM final rule might be forthcoming. Anything about a timeline on when those rulemakings would begin?
That's a great question, and this is a new process for us. We've never engaged in the kind of rulemaking that we're undertaking at this point. We've brought in people from around DOT. If there's ever been an effort to really kind of have a one DOT, this is certainly evidence of that. We have folks from FRA, from FMCSA, from FAA who are contributing to this effort. I don't want to commit to a specific date right now because, again, this is an evolutionary process for us, but I can assure you we're trying to move this along as quickly as we can. We're literally in the midst of writing rule content as I speak right now. I'm sitting right next to one of our lawyers who's been helping us with that, and so before I put date to paper, I'd rather have more definitive material to be able to talk to. So just keep in tune with us, keep plugged in, because we will be coming out as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, then we have a question about identifying small transit agencies and after 120 days after the enactment of the law. Any comment on that?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Identifying small urban transit agencies.
Okay. Yes. You know, that's a very important piece of MAP 21. And one of the things that our administrator had, really kind of given us in terms of guidance at the beginning of this process was that we wanted to do things holistically. We wanted to do things logically. We didn't want to do things out of step with what made sense from a rulemaking process or from really kind of setting up our program requirements. While that, we're very mindful of the deadlines established in MAP 21, and they're very important to us. We're trying to meet all of them as best we can. We also want to put this out on the street in a logical way. And so we're seeing that as being part and parcel of the fully thought out program and the fully thought out proposals that we will be making when we go out, with our rulemaking. So please, again, stay tuned for that. We're very mindful of that, but again, we're working on it as we speak.
Operator, we have a caller on the line?
Yes, we do. We have a question from the line of Roger Wood with DKIN Engineering Consulting. Your line is now live.
Yeah, hi. My question is, how closely is the TRACS committee activity interrelated with your program and your goals?
Thank you for the question. Actually, it's integral to what we're doing. We don't undertake this activity lightly, and TRACS has an incredible depth of knowledge and experience that we're depending on. So TRACS is, part of what we are, considering in terms of our program mechanisms of, what makes sense for the industry, and we're incorporating as much as we can from what TRACS is developing. They're at the very beginnings of their work, by the way. So we're very mindful. In fact, we met with them, 2 weeks ago, and had some really very valuable and fruitful conversations with them around both the national and the agency level plans. In fact, we made a number of presentations to them. One of the people I've mentioned is a gentleman from FAA who's come on board with us and is giving us incredible insight on what SMS really is. His name is Bill Voss, and he presented to the TRACS groups, and I think that was the basis of a wonderful interchange over that week.
Okay, we have another caller. Go ahead.
Our next question is from the line of Sharmila Samarathinge with. Please proceed with your question.
Hi, this is Sharmila Samarathinge. I'm with the Tri-State Oversight Committee as well as the Department of Rail and Public Transportation in Virginia.
Hi,
and my question, hello. My question is regarding the national safety plans that you referred to and how that reconciles with the requirement for the system safety program plans that the rail transit agencies are required to comply with, and also who would be required to prepare these agency safety plans. Would it be transit agencies? Would it be state safety oversight agencies, or any agency that is an FTA grantee?
That's a great question. Consider all of this to be. One thing I want to encourage people to do is think of this again from a systemic approach. These are not standalone documents that don't really kind of interact with each other. The agency plan will be informed by the national plan, and the national plan will be kind of, if you will, the true north of what it is we're trying to put in place in terms of requirements and what a system safety approach really is. So, we're looking for agencies to develop the agency plans based on the guidance that the national plan will provide, but also factoring in their conditions on the ground, their needs. We don't want this to be, again, a one-size-fits-all. And that's the beauty of kind of having a broader national plan that allows for the flexibility of defining at the local level, at the transit level, at the agency level, at the operator level, what the right parameters that should be considered when looking at a whole safety plan, at a safety process.
All right. So rather than going with nomenclature, it's rather going with this plan that would focus on SMS, focus on system safety, and so forth. And what you're saying is not get hung up on what it is actually called.
Correct. And think of it back to those 4 questions again. And I have to admit to stealing that totally from Bill Voss. It's those basic 4 questions that you really want to answer when you're looking at an SMS approach.
I want to get to someone who has submitted a question online. They've asked, system safety is risk management and hazard management. Now, why are we calling it SMS? It seems to confuse what we already do.
All right.
Well, if you...
Hi, and so I'm Bill Voss. I'm the aforementioned SMS guy. So I guess I'll try to step forward on that. And I'm probably less hung up on nomenclature than pretty much anybody you'll meet in the field. And first of all, I have to say that, no, I'm new to the transit field. I'm honored to be here because you guys are actually doing a tremendous job in system safety, and I totally acknowledge that. This really isn't about so much what's happening in the safety departments in the agencies. It's really about setting up a framework where the work that gets done at where the rubber meets the road gets supported at the SSO level and at the federal level. And that's the challenge of this. And so maybe we're making some realignments in language, but what the whole idea is to make sure that everybody has got plans, objectives, accountabilities that complement one another and actually enable the person on the ground who is making putting in place the controls and mitigations to do their job. I've worked this type of stuff all over the world in more than one industry, and the failing is rarely the person in the safety department doesn't know what they're doing. The failing is that they can't act upon it. And what we're doing is building a regulatory system and structure, calling it SMS, that actually is going to get behind and enable you guys to do what you need to do at the point of service delivery. That's an end-around answer, but there's a lot more to follow on that, and I want to assure you that we're not kidding when we say that we're here to be supportive. That's not just a line from a bunch of people in Washington. It's a bunch of people who understand what it's like to be in safety. So thanks.
Precisely. And again, as Bill alluded to, let's not necessarily just get hung up on initials or acronyms or names or nomenclature. It's about the processes behind ensuring that safety.
Okay, thank you. Next caller, please.
Our next question comes from the line of Mark Mitchell from Alaska Railroad. Please proceed with your question.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's still morning up here, so I'll reserve the right to say good morning.
Good morning.
We're currently in the process of transitioning our system safety program plan as mandated by as a requirement to receive FTA funding into the newly minted regulations from the Federal Railroad Administration. So there's a tremendous amount of parallel between what FRA is come up with as an SMS versus what FTA had fronted primarily through APTA. So I think this question is coming to you. As I've listened, there have been, I think, 2 different flavors of this question. So perhaps you've already covered this ground. But as a carrier, what can we expect as we craft our system safety program plan as required by FRA? How does that interface with the state program, and then how does that parlay into the national program?
Right. That's a great question. And those are the kind of nuances, those are the kind of mechanisms that we're really thinking through right now and trying to parse out what it is MAP 21 requires. What I do perhaps instead of what can you expect, perhaps what you shouldn't expect is that we're going to be redundant, or that we're going to be, piling regulation upon regulation. If there are already things that you are doing that comply with another agency's regulations, you can expect that we are going to take that into account, and that our processes are going to consider that when we're developing the entire kind of regime that we're thinking about in terms of our regulatory process and our rules of engagement with respect to the SSOs, the agencies, and ourselves, frankly. So, while I can't give you a definitive, kind of battle plan as to what it's going to look like at this point, please know that, again, we're not going to be dogpiling regulation upon regulation. That's not our intent at all. This is going to be as light a touch as we can manage.
And if I can, this is Bill Voss again. Let me see if I can help a little with that, because I'm not spilling the beans here. I'm just going to basically tell you things that are, as true as gravity about regulatory systems like this, and the principles we're going to have to follow to make these plans fit together. The real important thing is making sure we have the accountability straight, because the problem is always we end up in these plans. First of all, we talk about plans instead of actions. And we end up with the guy in the safety department writing a lot of plans without the authority to actually act upon them. And so what you're going to see in these plans is a much clearer definition, even clearer than you see in the law. We're going to enable the guy that allocates the resources of safety in the agency has to be stepping up and signing off on the risks, the mitigations, the controls. When the state steps in as a regulator, I'll tell you what, in any industry in the world, there is no industry who has completely figured out how to do SMS regulation. I've been through a lot of them. Deepwater Horizon, all these other things, trust me, we're not exactly, we are kind of on the cutting edge of a few things. Some things that you need to understand is that a regulator now has a different role. That regulator's role is really to challenge the thinking, the logic, the performance metrics you're setting, the expectations you're setting in your agency plan. You're going to say, here are my hazards, here's my controls, and here's the expected outcomes. You're going to have that chat with your regulator, and you as the regulator are going to walk away from the table with those things understood. Mm-hmm. And then what the heck does the next level do? Well, the next level has a supportive role, frankly. And that's to make sure the regulator can get their legislation in place, can have what they need to do to support you. And also there's got to be a place where there's a national objective saying when it all rolls up, we're going to have some common objectives for this industry that we're going to obtain. All of your efforts are going to add up to something. And they're going to step forward and say, we're going to put processes and mechanisms in place so you can compare your hazards to other people's hazards, your solutions and controls to other people's controls. And we're also going to block and tackle where you run into problems like maybe you can't even deal with your safety information because of FOIA or something. Throw that on our plate. And so those are the type of different responsibilities you see developing. And nothing we can write in the rules or anything is going to change the fact that's the way it's going to have to be. So I hope I'm giving you some encouraging words to say that we get the fact there needs to be different roles, responsibilities, and we know how to implement them.
And Bill brings a very practical approach to this. He brings, kind of world experience to this. You can imagine this is a new world order for us, for FTA. And, we're considering every facet of how this mechanism is going to be rolled out, how this program is going to look, and how it's effective. It's about, as Bill had indicated, action. It's not a paper chase.
Great. We got a lot of questions coming in, both over the phone and being submitted online. And just please keep them coming in. We'll get to as many of them as we can during this session. We plan on going until 3 o'clock. That's how much time we have here. So just, we really thank you for your participation. I'll take the next call. A lot of times, we focus on the larger transit agencies, but we have one from someone who is asking about a smaller transit agency. Which transit agencies will be required to develop a safety plan and appoint, train a safety officer? Will this apply even to the smallest rural one-man shops?
I'm sorry. I didn't even hear the question. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry. The question was about the smaller transit agencies.
Okay.
Which transit agencies are going to be required to develop a plan and appoint and train a safety officer? Is this going to apply to even the smallest one-man shop?
Well, we have authority to do this across the boards if you're taking FTA funding, if you receive FTA funding. In terms of how we're actually going to roll out, those are the kind of elements that we're developing right now that we want to put out in proposals. So I would recommend that you stay tuned for that because we will be asking for input. You know, I've mentioned this is all about input, and this is the beginning of a long-term process. So if we're not directly answering your question right now, don't worry. We're going to be going out with, you know, kind of our rulemaking process and taking comments on that. We're going to be having further webinars as we develop specific program elements. What do the agency plans look like? What is the national plan going to look like? What are standards going to look like? So stay tuned for those. But that's an excellent question that, you know, we're very mindful of, and we don't want to kind of just put it under the carpet. We're aware of, and you'll be seeing more from us on that topic.
Okay, next caller, please.
Our next question comes from the line of Kelton Ellerby with Columbia State Oversight OC. Please proceed with your question.
Yes, I'd like to know if the PowerPoint presentation will be available to the webinar participants.
Will it be available? Of course. We will put it on the website, the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, we will.
We will be putting it on the public website, so you'll be able to access it there.
Yes. Next caller.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Melissa Hull with South Dakota DOT. Please proceed with your question.
Hello. Mine is more of a comment from South Dakota, and we know that the rules that were developed were in response to accidents on fixed rail systems and in large metropolitan areas. And South Dakota would just like to reiterate that any implementation with respect to the rural bus system should be non-burdensome for the rural providers, and to also perhaps even use the National Transit Database as a tool for the any reporting requirements, and to use that as a mechanism to report any data that's required. And that's all I had today.
Thank you very much.
Next caller, please.
Our next question comes from the line of Joe Acosta with Charlotte Area Transit. Please proceed with your question.
Yes. Will you be setting up a website where people can call and ask or even share best management practices, especially with a lot of agencies trying to come up with new things, and especially with review by somebody, whether with FTA or maybe state, that will go ahead and say these are recommended?
That's a great idea. You know, we're looking to set up whatever mechanisms we possibly can, and we've got resources to do that, to collect comments, to get best practices, to really hear from the industry what's going on out there so that we can kind of better craft our rules here.
And if I can add on to that, basically it's one of the most important things I think we can do as a federal entity. Again, this is about enabling you guys to do your work, and guess what? If you're worried about being a small operator and not having the data you need to do your job, you're not the first person to have that worry.
That's right.
And you need to what you need is the support of things like NTD, agency like we have here to exchange the information, the best practices, because you can labor away all day long in your little operation, and you're never going to see the data that points to the hazards all by yourself. You need the integration and the support from above, and this is about putting in place mechanisms that will give you that.
The window becomes much bigger when you're looking at it through an industry lens.
And that's the difference. This isn't just about rolling plans downhill. It's rolling capabilities downhill and inside as well. Because little operators have hazards like big operators, are just harder to see. We need to be able to help you develop that insight and then help you figure out what to do without making you spend all day writing plans.
Alrighty. There's questions submitted online. Will certifications currently held by safety managers be considered for the new SMS?
That's under consideration. We don't really, I can't say that we've landed on a, kind of answer to that question. It's something that we're struggling with here. Obviously, MAP 21 is, again, a new level of requirement, and so we're trying to, again, factor in what already exists, but, again, push to a new world order, push to the new requirements of MAP 21. So I'm not really prepared to answer that question at this point, but I understand it's a concern out there.
Also, let me follow up with another question
Sure.
that's been submitted online. Will there be training criteria that have to be met for safety officers and or safety managers under the new MAP 21?
We would definitely like to set up a structure around that, and that's part of what we're developing right now.
Okay, great.
Again, we want that national consistency. We want that surety of capability across the country.
Okay, operator, next caller, please.
Our next question comes from the line of Dave Harris with New Mexico DOT. Please proceed with your question.
Hello, good afternoon. Vince was mentioning that currently the rural rulemaking is going on, so this question might be timely. To what extent is the focus on this draft rulemaking going to be on vehicle and driver safety? Because these are, things that most states are already pretty well focused on and already overseeing compliance on. And I think it goes back to that question I think you're hearing multiple times in multiple different ways, but how much of the focus is going to be on what we're doing now as opposed to new rules and regulations?
A great question. Again, this is part of our rulemaking process, and one of my concerns, and it's certainly my lawyer's concerns, is that we get ahead of ourselves in terms of what we're considering. I think what might be best is that, as we're developing more details around these plans and what we're going to be requiring, that you stay tuned to us. And again, there'll be ample opportunity to comment on some of our proposals as we go out with rulemaking, as we develop further detail in terms of what we're going to be asking of rural providers versus urban providers. So, I can't really venture out on that ledge quite yet, although I understand the concern. And believe me, we're hearing it here. We're copying all of these concerns and all these questions down. By all means.
This is Jason Schlossberg.
One of our lawyers.
Representative from the Chief Counsel's Office at FTA. One thing that's the beauty of the rulemaking process, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the process, but is that the agency doesn't really have a finite decision on how they want to handle things. The rulemaking process actually provides the agency with an ability to go out to the public and seek comment on what public thinks should be done. Of course, the agency provides a proposal to get that dialogue going. We don't want to start here at this juncture and create a finite decision before we actually get input from the public. That would be unfair to all of you. Again, as these rulemakings start to roll out, that's it. These questions you're giving are very helpful for us to help draft these proposals. While we're not giving you a finite answer right now, please be aware that we're using your information as fodder for our proposals. And then once these proposals go out, you can, again, opine on those proposals and provide your own ideas. This is a very democratic process. We don't want the agency to have a completely backroom, smoke-filled room approach here where we come out with these answers that you must follow. This is something that your input will be very important to make something that's accessible and acceptable to everyone involved.
Okay. Online, Ann Polk from Texas DOT asked, will the transit agency get an additional 0.05% in federal funding to implement their safety programs?
No, it's 0.5% of formula funds, but there's not an additional 0.5%.
Got it. Next caller, please.
Our next question comes from the line of Paul Goyette with Lee County Transit. Please proceed with your question. Mr. Goyette, your line is now live.
Hi, the question I had for the small transit agencies here in South Florida, hopefully I'm speaking for them all. We have been heard, we heard that some things are coming down through MAP 21, and we want to make sure we're all in compliance here with certain training requirements. Myself, I'm involved with TSI and some other training in the state and at federal level, and we just wanted to know if there's going to be some specific training criteria that is going to be outlined for the agencies or the safety officers or safety managers under the new regulation.
Yes, and again, it's interesting that we're hearing as much concern from the small providers as anything else. I want to make sure that you're aware, and again, that this is a process by which we're going to be providing technical support. This is not a process where we're just going to impose requirements on you and then say, well, good luck with that. We're going to be, kind of a partner in this. We're going to be, rolling out something that makes sense to establish a baseline, understanding what the resource commitments need to be, what, kind of the requirements are going to be, so that, again, we have that consistency across the country. So, again, stay tuned for more specific proposals as to what the requirements will be, and again, you'll have ample opportunity to weigh in on that. But again, you won't be left out there in the cold on your own.
Okay, the next call is submitted online. How will, it's from FTA of Maryland, how will the new requirements for safety plans affect nonprofit agencies that are already strapped for resources, and they may not be able to afford to develop such plans?
Great question. And to be honest with you, it's one that I have not thought through in any detail yet, nor would I venture to want to, make something up on the spot. But it's something that we will take back. And again, that's the beauty of this kind of interaction, is that we're hearing questions that are informing our rulemaking process and that we may not have considered on our own. So again, you'll be hearing again from us in terms of this kind of information collecting and how it really influences our rulemaking and our program structure. Fantastic question. Something we really need to take into consideration. Thank you for that.
And I do want to reiterate that if we don't get to all these questions, we will get back to as many as possible by email. We will return an answer to you. Next caller, please.
Our next question comes from the line of Richard Major with Triangle Transit. Please proceed with your question.
Yes, good afternoon. I was looking in the Transit Safety Management and Performance Measurement Guidebook, and one concern that I have is with smaller agencies like mine, managers wear a variety of hats, and I noticed that it says that it would be preferable that the safety manager be a person responsible for safety management but does not have direct responsibility for operational maintenance or engineering areas. Is that a hard and fast rule, or is that just a recommendation?
Well, it's an interesting observation, and again, I'm learning a ton just from hearing these concerns. Again, our intent, and I think the intent of MAP 21 is really to bring any safety staff and to bring the entire topic, the entire area of safety to a level of importance that is equal to, and I would dare say even above, other areas. So the kind of condition that you're describing is something that we're going to have to consider when we start putting out our recommendations. I'm not sure what document you're specifically referring to. I've not seen it, but obviously we want, in terms of a corporate structure, if you will, at any of these agencies, that the safety officer, the safety staff be as well considered and have the same level of resources and have the same level of executive accessibility that anybody in the organization would have. And so I'm not sure how that can happen if you're wearing more than one or two hats. Just an issue that we've got to think through ourselves as well. And Bill has some observations.
Yeah, I read that, and I'm very familiar with what we're talking about. I mean, there's a general intent that you don't want the person who's supposed to have that neutral safety viewpoint be under the thumb of the guy who might be driven more by the bottom line. But then again, that, as you point out, that's not always a realistic consideration when you have a very small organization.
Right.
What is very important, though, is at the end of the day, the guy who is responsible for deciding whether we spend money on safety or spend money on service knows the accountability for that. But those are the type of things that you'll be seeing, I think, in the rule, and the guidance material will be able to address more fully.
Right.
But you're not alone in that worry. And it's just the idea of trying to give safety a little bit of an independent voice, but the bottom line is we have to be realistic about how big an agency is.
Right. The reality is that sometimes that's unavoidable, and so what do we do about that? A very, very interesting conundrum.
Thank you.
Yes, someone from Coast Bus is asking, what types of requirements will be involved in the safety certification training program, and what resources will be available for it?
Well, again, there are resources for participating in trainings in certification. What the specific requirements are going to be, we're literally just developing those, and again, these are going to come out as proposals for comment, for public comment. So again, stay tuned for that. And again, we're encouraging folks to participate in that and really be, kind of plugged into what we're proposing, because we really do want your input.
Okay. Next caller, please.
Our next question comes from the line of Roger Wood with BKI Consulting. Your line is now live.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
My question is, you have a valuable resource in your project management oversight program. Within that oversight program is a nucleus of safety and security specialists who really are in the trench day to day, interacting with both transit agencies and the states themselves. And they would provide a valuable resource based on what they are physically seeing in the agencies, and that includes their program documentation and their implementation. My question is how is the PMO function interacting with respect to this program?
Again, another great question. I think we would do ourselves a disservice if we didn't pay attention to that resource. We know that there's a lot of capability out there. I've worked with PMOs before myself. I understand the skill set they bring, the knowledge they bring, and the insight that they bring, kind of working on a daily basis with the operators, with the transit providers. How we're specifically going to use that resource, how we're going to incorporate that into a fulsome program, I'm really not sure. I can't say that I'm prepared to answer that question right now. I do acknowledge and recognize that PMO resource is available to us, but I don't want to necessarily commit to kind of a project level or kind of operational FTA process yet until we've sussed out, until we've actually developed more kind of the programmatic umbrella. But, duly noted, that's something I've thought through too as well, but it's a resource that, we may want to consider as we roll out, the program.
Let me help you with that, Vince, too. Add to that. Roger, this is Ron Keel.
Hi, Ron.
How you doing? One way we have been using PMOC, I guess, their strength is by, we've implemented a little system called the Safety Readiness Review, and we've used that on several new projects that Vince has helped us with, and that we go to the PMOCs and we go to the state safety oversight agencies, and with us here at FTA headquarters, we use those resources to implement their knowledge and our knowledge and to make a better product for the transit agencies out there. So that's one mechanism we're looking at. We haven't fully developed that, like Vince said, but we are looking at that mechanism of using our system safety readiness review to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Donna Simmons of Capital Metro submitted a question online. She asked, one of our challenges has always been in getting comparable safety data for benchmarking purposes. Will MAP 21 standards help us address this?
Great question. As I'm learning more about SMS and from what I've kind of learned at the elbow and knee of other folks who've been doing this longer than I have, data and information, I don't even want to call it data, information is going to be critical to practicing SMS. It's the idea that, again, we're not all kind of in our own little cubbyhole with our own conditions. If we have a pool of information, a pool of data, then we can see what national trends are. We can see where we need to apply mitigations, where resources have to be applied. And as such, we're wanting to put together a framework of, a national framework of consistent information and data collecting, of consistent national data processing, and of data and information sharing, which is perhaps the most important part, that this is not just going into some computer somewhere and kind of churning out stats that no one else will ever see, that this becomes the basis for industry interactions. That's, again, one of the very, very kind of granular, very detailed processes that we're working out here for ourselves, because we've never really practiced it at the level of detail that MAP 21 and that an SMS approach is demanding of us. Stay tuned, again, as we roll out that part of our program and part of our process. We'll be looking for input on that. We'll be looking for your comments.
Okay. We have plenty of lines open, folks, and we will keep this going as long as you want. So don't be shy. Feel free to call in. So next caller, please.
Our next question is from the line of Robert Sedlock with DKI Consulting. Please proceed with your question.
Hello?
Hello.
My question was, why aren't we using the existing program as the base to build on? Mainly because it took 17 years to get the program to where it is today, and it is a successful program. It needs to advance to the next level, and that's where we should start. There are many things that can help us advance the program. There are two things that are very important to a transit agency or a state, and those are regulations that can be enforced by the federal government, and there's enforcement penalties if the states or the agencies don't comply. That's very, very important, because the state is only going to do what it has to do with the budget it has. And that's the second point. There should be a budget required to support the program from the states. That's where the starting point has to be to build on the existing program. I spent many years with the program and working with the states. Many of the things we did under the program were not required in the program, and we got a lot of opposition for it. But we sat down and talked about good sense, good judgment, and does it make sense to do things. Those are the things that have to be looked at, or should be looked at, as part of building the program. The other thing has to be is, if you look at the safety oversight program in the transit agencies that have to implement it, you have to start looking for double standards. And I'll just give you a clear example, and then I'll turn it over to somebody else. If you build a bridge, a rail bridge, under the FTA Safety Oversight Program, it has its own set of requirements. If the transit agency, the transit agency has to comply with those regulations because of the FTA Oversight Program. Yeah, that same agency can go on and build a bridge for a commuter rail system and not follow those requirements. And therefore, you set up a double standard. Those are the kind of requirements should be addressed in the future oversight program. So I'll stop there.
Well, thanks very much. There's a lot in there. But let me start from the top, if I might.
Sure.
I don't think we ever intended to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I don't think that what has come before is going to be completely out the window in terms of building the new program. That said, Congress has a clear intent with MAP 21 that we use 659 as a platform, as a foundation to build, further, to build, a more robust program. So, while we will be using, existing practice and, perhaps experience, and we'd be crazy not to. I mean, there is a lot of experience there that, comes before and that we want to take advantage of. The clear mandate, the clear, direction is that we do more, and that's our intent. MAP 21, again, is a new world order, so we're moving in that direction. Standards is a very important element, and you mentioned it in your question, really, in your comment. And again, that's another element that we're looking at, in deep detail. We have an experience, very robust experience working with FTA on voluntary standards. Well, where do we go from there? What do we use from, the body of existing standards? Where can we add to new standards? Who are our partners in that? Obviously, we want to have industry involved in that, and how that's going to influence the new 659 plus, that MAP 21 new world that, that we've been mandated to implement. So, those are all things that we will be developing, but I don't want to have you walk away with the impression that the next flushing sound you hear will be 659 in its entirety.
All right. Thank you. Matthew Moore of Idaho DOT, thanks a lot for submitting the question of what he wants to know if the facets that are being considered include scale and context. And we hear this a lot from state DOTs with regard to the smaller transit agencies that are sub-recipients.
Really, again, I know I've said it before, and I do want to reiterate it because it's very important. This is about scale and context. This whole process, this SMS approach, the MAP 21 construct is about scale. It's about context, and we're very mindful of that, which is why there is that sensitivity of how you do, kind of a 21st century rule. How do you do a regulatory regime, in a new world order?
If I can follow on, because we're hearing this again and again, and I'm not surprised because I've got 10 years of this in other industries going through the same process, and as always, it scares the daylights out of anybody with a small operator, and you probably should, because this may be the first time you've ever had the government do something for you that works, So let's be realistic. The whole point of this really is that, I took it down to 4 questions on the slide that I don't care if you're one-person operator. You want to be able to answer those questions, like what's going to bite me tomorrow? How am I sure that I got that right? Am I doing something about it that's working? Those are the type of questions that even if you're one-person operator, you want to be able to answer. And the difference here now is you're not just answering those on your own or answering voluntarily. You're answering with some background support. If you're a small operator and your regulators just asking you to write plans and they're not giving you supportive information, you're done. Because there's no way in the world that your little operation is going to show you enough data that's going to warn you about that thing that's going to happen next. So you need to have somebody like an FTA mopping the data up, bringing people together, talking about best practices, saying, you know what, we're seeing across a bunch of small operators this, that, or the other thing happening, and maybe y'all ought to watch out for that. That's the type of thing that we've done in other industries, and that's been one of the most important things, because overnight, people that are running small operations have their safety meter go up immediately because they're getting tips from other people like them. And then the other thing to consider is that actually the whole point of doing a good safety management system and overseeing it well is to make sure it matches the size and scope of the operation. Actually give regulator toolkits on how do you assess whether or not this property has got an SMS that actually fits them, or if they just hired a consultant and put a book on a shelf. I've been in war zones in high-risk environments doing system safety with a lot of electricity under periodic gunfire. It works really well there, and it can be done on 2 or 3 sheets of paper. And so I just want to keep reiterating that you can do this in a practical way, and you've got an agency here who's determined to find a way to do that. And so bear with us and keep talking to us about it.
Okay, next caller, please.
Our next question comes from the line of Malcolm Massenberg with NCDOT Public Transportation. Please proceed with your question.
Yes, hi. My name is Malcolm, and my question is it the expectation that at the state level there will be one office, one safety office to oversee all modes of transit?
Just one office? I'm not following the question. I get. You're expecting it. Are you saying that the state would set up just one office? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, no. That's my question. Is that the expectation that the state would set up one level to oversee all modes of transit?
The state has to take responsibility for transit safety where there is a rail operator. The issue is that there has to be at the state level that commitment, and we don't necessarily want to dictate what that mechanism is going to be, but we do want accountability. We want to see that the state is going to assume and adopt that accountability. So how the state does that, we're not necessarily going to dictate to one office or one person. We want to see what proposals the SSOs are going to come out with, or what the states are going to come out with in terms of setting up SSOs, but we do want to see that accountability. I mean, that's the ultimate goal here. I don't know that we're looking to establish one office or one corner of one particular office in any given entity or any state office or a state agency.
Well, let me add to that, too. We're not going to be dictating structure to you, but we will be dictating accountability.
Yeah.
So now how you set it up there, that's going to be up to the state. But what we're going to be looking for is that you're accountable for everything.
And that we believe that that structure will meet that requirement.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Online we have a question about training of the safety officer. There is a requirement for an adequately trained safety officer reporting directly to the general manager. Is adequately trained and reporting directly, will that be defined? And is there capacity within TSI for that training?
Yes, it will be, and we're looking at what the resources will be required for that. That's again part of our programmatic detail. As we roll this out, whether it's TSI, whether it's other entities. We're considering a number of different options, and we want to make it, as effective as possible. So that's, kind of even at the level of curriculum development. So you can imagine what kind of effort that is on our part here. But that's a great question. As we start developing that part, we'll be coming out with our proposals again, and we're going to encourage your input.
Okay, that's all the callers we have. So we will take 1 or 2 more questions online, and then, unless we get more calls in the meantime, and then we'll sign off. Okay, we have from I'm not sure where it's from, but will SMS be rolled into the triennial review process, or will it be separated out, like drug and alcohol testing, procurement, financial reviews? Also, will SMS also include a security piece?
That's a great question, and it's something we're looking at. From a office operations level, what we want to avoid, and all of you may know or may not know that I once was the director of the triennial review of the Oversight program here for FTA, and I understand full well that kind of operators are not looking for yet another review or another audit or another set of people coming in and looking through your books. So we're trying to do this with as minimal a footprint as we can, but that's effective. So What our specific, process is going to be, I don't know at this point, nor would I venture to hazard any guesses, but, that's one of the considerations certainly, is that triennial be, or that safety be part of the triennial process as well. There may be other options out there and other proposals that we'll be coming out with as we develop this more fully, but it's certainly a consideration. Security, that's a great question. We're really not going to be in the business of kind of embracing security in the sense of perhaps, anti-terrorism and those kinds of activities. We're not an agency really in the business to do that. There are other federal agencies that can do that, perhaps, more capably than we even can with more resources. We certainly will continue to be considering public safety, and that's certainly something that I know is, at the heart of a lot of these questions or some of the concerns that we've heard recently. That's something that, will develop over time, with input from our front office, from our administrator, who's, very focused on this issue. But again, from a kind of a terrorism or anti-terrorism perspective, you won't be seeing FTA playing a very full role in that from here on out.
Okay, next caller, please. We do have another caller online.
I'm sorry, it appears the caller has disconnected.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I'll ask about ferries. We have a question about ferries. FTA-funded ferry boat transit systems, will they fall in these requirements? And if you could talk a little bit about, what about if they fall under the jurisdiction of the Coast Guard?
Yeah, it's a great question. We do have jurisdiction, but it may not be exercised immediately. The issue becomes, we don't want to necessarily replicate or duplicate what the Coast Guard is doing. So we're going to be, kind of doing a little bit of a gaps analysis to see where we might weigh in, especially since we are providing funding. But again, that's probably a little bit further out in our, kind of our trajectory as we develop the program.
And then a follow-up question with that, the maritime industry has SMS systems such as those created by the Passenger Vessel Association. Sure. And will those be acceptable alternatives, or will they need to be approved by FTA, TSO, or what?
Again, that depends on how, we develop the program. What I'm learning about SMS, and again, I'm a quick study, thank heavens, but SMS is SMS. And it's almost agnostic as to what the mode is. So a good safety plan is a good safety plan is a good safety process. And we want to see what that looks like. And if there are already things that are in existence out there, we're certainly willing to entertain, evaluating them, looking at them, and perhaps even accepting them. But again, that's a little further down the road for us than where we are now.
And I believe we have another caller. No?
Excuse me, we do have, our next question is from Melissa Hull with the SD Department of Transit. Your line is now live.
Thank you, and hello again. I would like to build on Idaho DOT's comment about scale and context for the safety plans, and also, or ask, has the FTA considered allowing a state DOT to draft a statewide safety plan to govern rural subrecipients?
It's certainly one of the things we would consider. Again, we're going to be coming out with, kind of full suite of proposals, but that's, certainly one of the things that we would want to look at.
Okay.
And again, to kind of reiterate what we wanted to say, and the real message is that we understand that it really is about context and scalability.
Okay. Excellent. I guess a further comment, and then I'll sign off here. We certainly feel that this would alleviate the expense and the effort needed to oversee each individual plans for the subrecipients. Subrecipients could be monitored by the state DOTs, and then the state DOTs to be evaluated during the state management reviews.
Great. You're doing a lot of thinking. That's great. Those are good proposals.
And your thinking is not alone. I think the only thing that we worry about on our end is we've got to make sure the person that runs the operation owns the safety,
right?
And they don't just push it off to the Capitol. And that's the only other balance I think. But boy, the whole point is let's spend the money identifying the next hazard and putting control in place instead of writing more paper.
One of our lawyers has a comment on this too, and I don't buy lunch without consulting with them first.
Yeah, just to point out, I mean, we can't really interpret this further until we get to a rulemaking stage, but I just wanted to point out to you, you might be interested in seeing, if you haven't noticed already, in Section 5329 D3, it talks about the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan drafting and certification. And it says for a recipient receiving assistance under Section 5311, a state safety plan may be drafted and certified by the recipient or a state.
Okay.
So it does provide for some entities a level of flexibility for drafting safety plans.
Excellent. Thank you.
You bet. Okay, I believe we got Foothill Transit on the line.
Our next question is from the line of Jamie Becerra with Foothill Transit. Your line is live.
Thank you so much. Yes, this is Jaime Becerra, Safety and Security Director for Foothill Transit. The presentation that's been made today in kicking off this initiative has focused primarily on rail. And a lot of my colleagues on the line right now are from fixed route buses and also from paratransit and rural services. I want to ask the question directly. What is the impact of these MAP 21 safety initiatives on the fixed route and paratransit operators? I understand that we're kicking off with rail because that's the priority at this particular moment due to past events, but we need to prepare if it's coming in our direction, and what is it that the impact we can expect?
Well, again, we are trying to parse out the elephant. We're trying to, roll this out given our resources and given kind of what we see as perhaps immediate priority. What we're going to roll out for bus, whatever that is, will not be a surprise to you.
Okay.
We're not going to do anything that wasn't first through a consultative process, that wasn't through kind of a public notice and comment process, and that is a complete surprise to you in that community, which we realize is a very, very significant part of the entire transit panorama. One of the things we have to really consider is, for example, right now we have a rail safety advisory committee. Do we expand that to include bus? Do we create another one to include bus? Those are all considerations that we are really going through right now so that we can get a better picture as to what conditions are out there in the bus world, what the needs are, and so again, so that we're not ambushing anybody when we finally come up with something that's, a more full proposal, or God forbid if we were to come up with, kind of a program without having talked to you and having recruited your opinions and your support and your participation on this. So definitively, what are we going to do about bus? I'm not prepared to answer that right now, but again, I reiterate, we're not going to do this kind of in a silo. We're not going to do this in the dark without consulting with you.
FTA did a great job of rolling out the notification of this particular webinar. Can we expect that level of outreach when we do start getting into that consultation and advisory phase?
Absolutely, absolutely. You'll definitely be hearing from us on that front. And as I said earlier in the presentation, and in fact, you've heard his voice here. Paul is responsible for putting together our kind of national outreach plan, which includes, all of our stakeholders, all of our partners. We recognize that, yes, it's the one thing that's really kind of actually exciting and difficult about the job we have to do. We're, other agencies have just to focus on rail or bus or even, aviation, say. We're looking at a massive diversity, a broad diversity of modes. And so, this is going to be rolled out in time, especially given that we're a 500-person agency. And, we're very, kind of, there's a priority, there's a high profile for safety, but we're still going to be lean and mean.
Thank you, Jaime. Next caller.
Our next question is from the line of Timothy Bradshaw with Chittenden County Transportation. Your line is now live.
Hi, my name is Tim Bradshaw. I'm from Chittenden County Transportation Authority in Burlington, Vermont. My question, we run fixed route and as well as deviated route services. We're also in the process of planning a new transit facility. I was wondering what the expectations are under the MAP 21 safety initiatives for safety audits of our transit facilities and recommendations in that regard.
Well, again, we're developing our proposals right now, so specifically to how we will undertake, facility audits or rolling stock audits. I'm not really prepared to venture, kind of a proposal at that point. But again, do stay tuned because again, these are part of this process. Part of having this call today is to start hearing the concerns and, kind of getting ideas from the industry. And again, this is one that you can bet we're furiously writing down here. We're recording so that we can, start to factor it into the program as we develop it. Great question.
Okay, next caller, please.
Our next question is from the line of Jason Burke with State of Arkansas. Please proceed with your question.
Hi, this is Jason Burke. I'm from the state of Alaska. I'm curious to know what extent you're proposing potential safety standards for people with disabilities as passengers or in the maintenance of facilities and equipment.
Again, another wonderful question. One of the things that's kind of emerging for me from this discussion, it really is as much a learning process for me and for all of us here as it is, I hope, for you, is that we have a lot of complexity here. We have a lot of considerations that we're going to have to really factor into our program rollout, our rulemaking proposals as we move forward. The issue of disabilities is one that's occurred to me, and I've spoken about to other folks here, is what kind of research will we be doing? We obviously want to tie our research program to the needs of the safety aspect of the industry. How, again, the previous question, how are facilities going to be considered as we look at safety? These are all things that we're going to have to really kind of tackle and address on a very detailed basis. So, I thank you for bringing it up. I don't have anything I can say definitively at this point. Obviously, we have an Office of Civil Rights here who are going to play an important role in this, and we're going to reach out to them to develop, kind of like concepts and ideas as to what's, right for that very important community. But again, you're kind of pointing pathways out for us, so I appreciate that.
Okay, we have a few minutes left and a few callers left, and so next caller, please.
Our next question is from the line of Mary Beth Lewis Baker from Breckenridge. Please proceed with your question.
Hi, this is Mary Beth Lewis Baker. I'm the transit manager of the Breckenridge Free Ride in Colorado. And I was just wanting to call and just ask about the feasibility of, under the safety regulations, of getting some universal passenger conduct type regulations and guidelines, if not just specifically what needs to happen, or perhaps the ability to have FTA impose that local communities that have transit have to enact a local ordinance to cover conduct of passengers.
Wow, that's very creative.
Well, that's my biggest risk exposure is my passengers themselves and their behavior.
Interesting. And so what are the mitigations around that particular vulnerability? Fantastic. That's a...
Well, I have passengers that will take photographs on board, and the flash blinds the driver.
Yeah.
And trying to get that enforced without a local ordinance or something with teeth that says, hey, you can't do that. And so from a broad perspective, just the passenger's conduct itself, and my employees are often in jeopardy with some of the verbal abuse and different things that passengers do. Mm-hmm. And I've met with some local resistance in trying to get a local ordinance, to cover passenger conduct, and it would really help to have that tool from FTA saying, okay, you have to come up with some minimum standards and have an ordinance that you can enforce those.
Yeah, well, that's very creative. Thank you.
And then I want to just also add one more thing. I'm the one-person transit manager. I do everything here. And I also don't have the budget to be hiring a safety officer. I'm very fortunate that my background is that I was a regional safety and compliance officer with Laidlaw in the mid-'90s, so I have that background. Yeah. But if that were a requirement for a system my size to have to have a separate person, it's not practical or feasible.
Sure, I bet we'll hear that from others as well.
I'm sure you will. Everybody is a little cautious about what the expectations here are for the rural and the small person, because I can tell you firsthand some of the requirements in the Title VI circular and the new changes that have to come up. You know, I have to go out and validate the U.S. Census under that and come up with some methodology to validate what my population demographics are, and I'm finding that to be a big challenge when I'm a one-person outfit.
Yep. I hear you loud and clear.
Thank you so much. We have a few more callers on the line. If we don't get to everybody, I apologize, but please submit your question online if we don't get to you on the phone. Next caller, please. We have 4 minutes until we turn into pumpkins here.
Our next question is from Robert Sedlock with BKI. Please proceed with your question.
Rob, this is Bob again, and I'm in Colorado. Why isn't security at almost the same level of importance as safety? And after you answer that, I'd like to comment on it, please.
I guess because the real MAP 21 mandate is about safety, and the feeling is that there are other federal agencies that can perhaps more competently and more completely fulfill a true security role in protecting transit. You know, I don't want you to think that we're just kind of walking away from the table completely. Again, I mentioned that we're, you know, certainly interested in public safety, if you will. I mean, but security, you know, since I suppose the days of 9/11 has a kind of different flavor and a different look. And so we're wanting to kind of establish a bright line between our responsibilities and some of our sister federal agencies over at DHS, for example.
In fairness, I want to get to the next caller. We only have a brief amount of time. So next caller, please.
Our next caller is Don Bazinski with ISR. Your line is now live.
Thank you very much. The FTA already has a very useful, valuable book called the FTA's Handbook for Transit Safety and Security Certification. Is this handbook being superseded, or will it still be valid and useful as a resource document?
Well, it's certainly a resource document that will inform how we move the program forward. Will it be revamped? Will it be completely refurbished, or, you know, perhaps, you know, I don't know, rendered obsolete by new documentation? I don't know yet. But, you know, the proof will be in the pudding. As we start to kind of develop more program ideas, you know, we'll figure out, you know, how the actual guidance and implementation will roll out with the industry.
Thank you all so very much for your participation. It's been a great conference. We look forward to more in the future. We will get back to as many of you online as we possibly can. This concludes our webinar and our question and answer session. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you.